the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Some really fascinating stuff you sent our way this time, focusing on, what a pretty high-stakes meeting in East Asia with the foreign ministers of Japan, China, and South Korea all in the same room.
Yeah, definitely some, pretty significant players all together in one place. And looking at this Red State report, we've got the core of it, like the real underlying tension there seems to be about North Korea and their nuclear ambitions. But, it gets into a lot more than just that, as we'll see. It really touches on a whole range of issues facing that region.
So for this deep dive, then, what we really want to do is get to the bottom of what came out of this trilateral meeting. Really pull out the most important insights, try to understand all the different factors at play, and grasp why this particular event really matters, in the grand scheme of global politics, which are always changing. Okay, so let's get into it. And I think a good place to start is probably with North Korea, which always seems to be a major topic in that part of the world.
Yeah, for sure. And the report is pretty clear that Japan's foreign minister, Takeshi Iwaya, took a very strong stance when it came to North Korea's denuclearization. Like, he just straight up said that complete denuclearization is totally non-negotiable, that they're not going to budge on that, which of course lines up with the UN Security Council resolutions that are already in place.
Right, which for anyone who's been following this issue, that's pretty much been the consistent message from those nations.
Yeah.
Right, especially the ones closest to North Korea. And I guess that stance seems even more urgent now, considering North Korea's been getting closer and closer to Russia, wouldn't you say?
Exactly, yeah. That growing relationship between those two really does add another layer of instability to the whole situation. It probably makes countries like Japan even more determined to see North Korea completely get rid of their nuclear program. It's interesting, though, it's not just that they're taking this hardline stance, but it kind of makes you wonder what the consequences might be if North Korea doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah, and it wasn't all just focused on that one big security issue either, right? I mean, this meeting, they covered a lot more than just nuclear threats, from what I understand.
Oh, yeah. That's really important to keep in mind. So while North Korea was obviously a major concern, these ministers also got into a whole bunch of other challenges that all three countries are dealing with. We're talking about things like, their population's getting older, birth rates going down, how to better prepare for natural disasters, even stuff like strengthening cultural ties between their people. It seems like they're recognizing that even with all their differences, they've got some pretty similar problems at home to deal with.
So on one hand, they've got these internal issues they're all facing. But then on the other hand, China seems to be really pushing the conversation towards economic matters.
That's right. China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, was really focused on building stronger economic ties in the region. He was advocating for reviving these trilateral economic talks that they used to have, and also expanding that big trade deal, the RCEP. The way China presented it, it sounds like they see potential for more collaboration in areas like tech and climate change, as a way to boost growth across East Asia.
But reading through the report, it seems like there's some hesitation from the other countries about these economic proposals from China. Why is that?
Well, it really gets to the heart of trust, or a lack of it, and the whole history of this region. It's kind of hinted at in the report, but there are these long-standing concerns about whether China really plays fair when it comes to trade and whether they respect intellectual property rights. These things have always been part of the conversation when talking about doing more business with China. So while closer economic ties might sound good on paper, there's this worry that the playing field isn't actually level.
Makes sense. Okay, so let's shift gears a little and talk about the bigger picture. This meeting wasn't just happening in isolation. There's obviously a lot of other stuff going on globally that affects things.
For sure. And Minister Iwaya, even though he didn't specifically call out China by name, he had some pretty pointed criticisms about their activities in the South China Sea. Plus, he directly condemned what Russia's been doing in Ukraine. He framed both of those things as being, violations of a country's right to govern itself and against the rule of law internationally.
So even in a setting where they're supposed to be talking about cooperation, there's definitely some messaging going on and implicit criticisms being made about things happening both inside and outside the region. And, all this comes as Japan is considering hosting a trilateral leaders summit later this year, which seems like a pretty big deal considering the history between these three countries.
Oh yeah, absolutely. For Japan to be the host of something like that, it's a big step diplomatically, especially when you consider how complicated and, let's be honest, often strained their relationships with China and South Korea have been. The report kind of touches on some of those really sensitive historical issues, things like the atrocities committed by Unit 731 during World War II, the whole issue of comfort women, and those ongoing disputes over territory, like the Leoncourt Rocks and Okinotorishima. These aren't just things that happened in the past, they still impact the political situation today.
So you could say that this meeting of foreign ministers is kind of like a first step. They're trying to figure out how to deal with all that sensitive historical baggage while Japan tries to take on more of a leadership role in the region. It's tricky.
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope with a lot of history weighing down on them. And, it's important to consider South Korea's perspective here, too. Their foreign minister, Cho Tae-yul, he made a point of saying that this partnership between the three countries is becoming more and more important, especially with all the uncertainty in the world right now.
And the report connects that to the idea of a possible second Trump administration and how that might change things globally. How does that factor into all of this?
Well, thinking big picture, the idea seems to be that if U.S. foreign policy shifts, maybe becomes less predictable or less engaged, then countries like Japan and South Korea feel like they need to strengthen their own relationships in the region. It's about making sure things stay stable and that they can deal with problems together, no matter what's happening elsewhere. It's a proactive way of thinking about security and diplomacy in their own backyard.
And it sounds like those smaller bilateral meetings that happened alongside the main trilateral meeting were pretty interesting too.
Oh, definitely. The fact that Japan and China had their first high-level economic talks since 2019 is a pretty big deal in itself. It's like a cautious step towards working together on economic issues again. But during those talks, Foreign Minister Wang Yi also criticized what he called unilateralism and protectionism. He didn't say it directly, but most people would probably see that as a dig at the U.S.
And the report also mentions some specific things that are causing friction, like that ban China has on seafood from Japan.
Right, that's a really good example of the tension between them economically. That ban, which China put in place after Japan started releasing that treated wastewater from the Fukushima plant, it's definitely causing problems. It's not just about the money for Japanese fishermen, it also raises questions about whether they trust each other and whether China's using economics as a weapon in this diplomatic dispute.
It's interesting, though, because at the same time, the relationship between Japan and South Korea seems to be getting better. Their alliance is becoming stronger, and some people might see that as a way to balance out China's growing influence in the region.
That's a valid point. There are still historical issues between Japan and South Korea and those ongoing arguments about territory like the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands and what China's doing in the South China Sea. But the fact that Tokyo and Seoul are both trying to make their relationship better is a big change in the region. It seems like they're putting shared security concerns first and want to be more aligned strategically.
So when you put all of this together, it wasn't just some routine diplomatic get-together. It seems like a really complicated mix of shared interests in keeping the region stable, a lot of historical baggage they can't just ignore, and these different ideas about what the future of East Asia should look like.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. You've got these three countries dealing with urgent threats like North Korea's nukes, while also trying to come to terms with their shared history and figure out their place in a world that's changing so fast.
So for everyone listening, here's the main takeaway from this whole deep dive. This meeting between Japan, China, and South Korea's foreign ministers was a real balancing act. They're trying to find common ground on these huge challenges, especially North Korea's nuclear program. But they're doing it with all this historical baggage, and while the whole geopolitical landscape is shifting.
And understanding that whole dynamic, all that complexity, it's really crucial. It helps us understand the relationships that shape East Asia and all the work that goes into trying to keep things stable in a region that has a big impact on the whole world.
And with that in mind, here's something for you to think about. Given how much history matters and all the pressure from global politics, what are the chances that Japan, China, and South Korea can actually cooperate in the long run? It's a question that's still unfolding and one that's worth thinking about even after this deep dive is over.
In the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, There's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground. For freedom, for tradition, in this land we found. Cherish our Constitution, the words that set us free, the right to bear arms, to speak and to agree. We honor our forefathers who fought with steadfast might for the dream of a nation shining bright in the night. In every town and village, in every heart and home, we'll uphold our principles, together we'll roam. Through trials and through triumphs, we'll never lose our way. With conservative values leading us day by day, we're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservative values in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground. For freedom, for tradition, in this land we've found. We've done without. So here's to the brave, to the strong, to the free, to the spirit that binds us from sea to shining sea. We'll dive deep into our